Keith Richards' mother died hating the man he'd become. They hadn't spoken in 15 years. At her funeral, Keith picked up the guitar she'd bought him at age 7 and played the lullaby she used to sing. Then he said 2 words that broke 200 hearts. "Forgive me." It was November 2007, and Keith Richards was on tour in Australia when he got the call. His mother, Doris Richards, had died at the age of 91 in her home in Kent, England. Keith was 10,000 miles away, and they hadn't spoken in 15 years. The last words his mother had said to him in 1992 still echoed in his head. "You've wasted your life on noise and drugs. You're not the son I raised." And Keith, hurt and angry, had responded with words he'd regretted ever since. "Then maybe you should have raised someone else." They'd never spoken again after that. 15 years of silence. 15 years of pride and hurt and stubbornness on both sides. And now she was gone, and Keith would never get the chance to say he was sorry. He canceled the remaining tour dates and flew home to England, a journey that took nearly 24 hours. During that entire flight, Keith sat with a small acoustic guitar on his lap, the first guitar his mother had ever bought him when he was 7 years old. He'd kept it all these years, even during the worst of his addiction, even when he'd sold or lost almost everything else. This guitar, his mother's gift, had survived. The funeral was scheduled for November 15th at a small church in Dartford, the town where Keith had grown up. He arrived the day before and went to his mother's house, which he hadn't entered in 15 years. It looked exactly as he remembered. The same furniture, the same photographs on the wall, the same china in the cabinet. But there was one thing that was new, a scrapbook on the coffee table. Keith picked it up and started flipping through it. Every page was about him. Every article about the Rolling Stones, every magazine cover, every review of every album. His mother had been collecting them, all of them, for 40 years. Keith sat down heavily on the couch, tears streaming down his face. She'd been following his career the entire time. Even during those 15 years of silence, she'd been cutting out articles, saving photographs, documenting his life. She'd cared. She'd always cared. But pride and hurt had kept them apart, and now it was too late to tell her he understood. Too late to say he was sorry. Too late to hear her say she was proud of him. The funeral was small, maybe 200 people, family, old friends from Dartford, neighbors who'd known Doris for decades. Keith sat in the front row, holding the small acoustic guitar on his lap, not speaking to anyone. People kept glancing at him, this famous rock star who'd shown up to his own mother's funeral, looking lost and broken. The vicar gave a eulogy, talking about Doris's life, her work as a baker, her love of gardening, her dedication to her community. But there was a noticeable absence in the eulogy, almost no mention of Keith, her only son. It was as if the vicar didn't know how to address the elephant in the room, the famous son who'd been estranged from his mother for 15 years. After the eulogy, there was an awkward silence. The vicar looked at Keith as if expecting him to say something. But Keith couldn't speak. His throat was too tight, his grief too overwhelming. Instead, he stood up, opened the guitar case, and pulled out the small acoustic guitar. It was worn and battered, the varnish faded, some of the inlay missing, but it was still perfectly in tune. Keith always kept it in tune, even though he rarely played it. It was too precious, too connected to memories he'd tried to forget. Keith walked to the front of the church, sat on the steps near his mother's casket, and began to play. Not a Rolling Stones song, not rock and roll, but a simple lullaby, Scarborough Fair, the old English folk song his mother used to sing to him when he was a child. She'd sing it while tucking him into bed, her voice soft and gentle. And when she'd given him this guitar at age 7, the first song she'd taught him to play on it was this one. "Every musician needs to know where they come from," she'd told him. "This song is where you come from. This is home." Keith's voice, usually so rough and weathered, was surprisingly gentle as he sang. The words of the song filled the small church. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. People in the pews started crying, not just polite funeral tears, but deep, shaking sobs, because what they were witnessing wasn't a performance, it was a son saying goodbye to his mother in the only language he knew how to speak fluently, music. When Keith finished the song, he set the guitar down gently and stood up. He walked to his mother's casket and placed his hand on it, and then he spoke, his voice breaking, just 2 words: "Forgive me." The church was absolutely silent except for the sound of 200 people crying. Keith stood there for a long moment, his hand on the casket, tears streaming down his face. Then he picked up the guitar, returned to his seat, and sat with his head bowed for the rest of the service. After the funeral, at the reception, Keith's cousin Margaret approached him. She was one of the few family members who'd stayed in touch with him over the years. "Your mother talked about you all the time," Margaret said, "even after you stopped speaking, especially after you stopped speaking." Keith looked up at her. "She never called, never wrote. I thought she hated me." Margaret shook her head. "She didn't hate you, Keith. She was hurt, and she was scared that she'd lost you to the drugs, to the lifestyle, to that world she didn't understand. But hate? Never." Margaret pulled out a letter from her purse. "She gave this to me 6 months ago, made me promise to give it to you if anything happened to her. But she made me promise something else, too, not to give it to you until after the funeral. She said you needed to feel the weight of the silence before you could understand what she wanted to say." Keith took the letter with shaking hands. It was addressed to him in his mother's handwriting. He excused himself, went outside to the churchyard, and sat on a bench near her grave. Then he opened the letter. "Dear Keith," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the harsh words. I'm sorry for the silence. I'm sorry for being too proud and too stubborn to pick up the phone and tell you that I never stopped loving you. I followed your career, every album, every tour, every interview. I kept everything in a scrapbook. Margaret knows where it is. I wanted you to know that even when I was angry, even when I was disappointed, I was always proud. You did something I never had the courage to do. You followed your dream. You made music that touched millions of people. You became exactly who you were meant to be." The letter continued. "I know I said terrible things. I said you wasted your life, but I was wrong. You didn't waste it. You lived it on your terms. And I was scared because I didn't understand that world, and I was terrified I'd lose you to it. And in trying to hold on, I pushed you away. That's my failure, not yours. I want you to know something, Keith. That guitar I bought you when you were 7, I saved for 6 months to afford it. Your father thought I was crazy spending that much on a child's toy, but I knew. I heard you humming melodies. I saw your fingers tapping rhythms. I knew you had music in your soul, and I wanted to give you the tool to let it out. Every song you've ever played, every stage you've ever stood on, started with that guitar, started with me believing in you." Keith was sobbing now, barely able to read through his tears. "I'm dying, Keith. The doctors say I have maybe a year, and I'm not afraid of death. I'm only afraid of dying with this wall between us. I've wanted to call you 1,000 times, but I'm a stubborn old woman, and I kept waiting for you to call first, and you're a stubborn man, and you were probably waiting for me, and so we've wasted 15 years in a contest of pride that nobody wins. I'm writing this letter because I can't let pride follow me to the grave. I love you, Keith. I've always loved you, and I'm sorry. I hope you can forgive a foolish old woman who loved her son so much she forgot how to show it. Mum." Keith sat on that bench for 2 hours, reading and rereading the letter. His mother had written it 6 months before she died. 6 months when he could have called, could have visited, could have said the things that needed to be said. But he hadn't known, and she hadn't told him she was dying. She'd let pride keep them apart until the very end. When Keith finally returned to the reception, he found Margaret. She was dying for 6 months. Why didn't anyone tell me? Margaret looked sad. She made us promise not to. She said she didn't want you to come back out of obligation or pity. She wanted you to come back because you wanted to.
I did want to, Keith said, his voice breaking. I wanted to call 100 times. I just didn't know how to start after so long. I know, Margaret said. She said the same thing. Keith spent the next week in England, going through his mother's house, finding traces of the love she'd never spoken aloud. The scrapbooks, not just 1 but 5, covering his entire career. Photographs of him as a child, carefully preserved. News clippings about his wedding, about his children being born, about his induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She documented everything, even during the silent years. In her bedroom, Keith found something that broke him all over again. On her bedside table was a photograph of the two of them from when he was 7 years old, the day she'd given him the guitar. In the photo, young Keith was holding the guitar, beaming with joy, and Doris had her arm around him, smiling down at him with obvious love and pride. It was the same photograph Keith had in his own home, in his own bedroom. They'd both kept it close, both looked at it, but neither had reached out. Keith took the small guitar back to his hotel and did something he hadn't done in years. He wrote a song. Not for an album, not for a tour, just for himself and his mother. He called it Dartford Lullaby, and it was about pride and regret and love that survives even when words don't. The lyrics were simple. You gave me 6 strings and a dream. I gave you silence in return. You kept the clippings, I kept the guitar. We both kept the hurt. I'm sorry, Mum, for the years we lost, for the calls I didn't make, for thinking time was infinite, for every wrong I can't remake. Keith recorded the song in a small studio in London, just him and the guitar she'd bought him. He never released it commercially. Instead, he had a single copy pressed on vinyl and buried it with her scrapbooks in a time capsule he placed at her grave. She collected my music, Keith told Margaret. Now she has a song that's only hers, one the world will never hear, just for her. After returning to touring, Keith started doing something different. At the end of every concert, after the encores and the bows, after the lights came up and most of the audience had left, Keith would sit on the stage with that small guitar and play Scarborough Fair, just once, quietly, for himself, for his mother. It became his ritual, his way of saying the things he'd never said when she was alive. Reporters who learned about Keith's mother's death and the estrangement asked him about it in interviews. Keith was always honest. I loved her, she loved me, but we let pride keep us apart. And I'd give anything, anything to have those 15 years back, to have made that phone call, to have swallowed my pride and said, I'm sorry, when she was alive to hear it. When asked what he'd want people to learn from his story, Keith said, don't wait. Don't let pride or hurt or stubbornness keep you from the people you love, because you think you have time, and then suddenly you don't. And I'm sorry said to a casket doesn't bring anyone back. In 2010, Keith published his autobiography, Life. He dedicated it to Doris Richards, who gave me my first guitar and my last lesson. The chapter about his mother and their estrangement is the most raw and honest writing in the book. He doesn't excuse himself, doesn't blame her, just tells the truth about 2 stubborn people who loved each other but forgot how to show it. Keith is now over 80 years old. Every year on November 15th, the anniversary of his mother's funeral, he posts the same photograph on social media. Young Keith at age 7, holding the guitar, his mother's arm around him. The caption never changes. She gave me music. I gave her silence. Don't make my mistake. Call your mum. The small guitar she bought him when he was 7 is no longer used for that quiet Scarborough fare at the end of shows. Keith had it professionally preserved and displays it in a case in his home, but he had an exact replica made, and it's that replica he plays at the end of every concert now. The original is too precious to risk. It's the last physical connection I have to her love. But music is meant to be played, not preserved. So I play a copy, and I remember what the real one represents, a mother who believed in her son even when she couldn't tell him so. The story of Keith Richards and his mother is a reminder that love and pride are often tangled together, and that sometimes the people we love most are the ones we hurt deepest. It's a reminder that I'm sorry and I love you should never wait for the perfect moment, because the perfect moment might never come. And most importantly, it's a reminder that silence, once started, becomes easier to maintain than to break, until suddenly it's too late, and silence is all that's left. If this story of love, pride, and regret moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. But more importantly, if there's someone in your life you need to call, someone you've been estranged from, someone you owe an apology or an I love you, don't wait. Don't let Keith's regret become your own. Call them today, because forgive me shouldn't be something you say to a casket. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Have you reconciled with a family member after years of silence, or do you regret waiting too long? Share your story in the comments. Ring that notification bell for more true stories about the moments that teach us what really matters.